vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 17th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you had a wonderful St. Patrick's Day. And in honor of that day, may the road rise to meet you, may the wind always be at your back, may the sun shine warm upon your face, the rains fall soft upon your fields, and until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Now for the key articles under Business and Finance. For the fifth year running, Fed officials find themselves expecting inflation to fall back to their 2% goal, only to be confronted with a new disruption that complicates the path to it. A modest decline in oil prices helped to lift the S&P 500, NASDAQ, and Dow by 1%, 1.2%, and 0.8% respectively, in what some investors described as a relief rally. Workers at a critical beef processing plant owned by JBS went on strike, stifling production at a time when prices for the meat are at record highs. Warner Brothers CEO Zaslav stands to collect over $800 million in severance and other pay after Paramount acquires the company. UniCredit increased pressure to take over Commerzbank, a bid opposed by the German government, which owns 12% of the target lender. Nabus agreed to a 5-year deal valued at about $27 billion to supply artificial intelligence infrastructure capacity to Meta platforms. Dollar Tree issued a cautious outlook for the year amid tariff and freight cost uncertainty, even as demand for discretionary products remains strong. Public Storage agreed to acquire National Storage Affiliates in a $5.63 billion all-stock deal, creating a company with a combined market capitalization of about $57 billion. Foxconn reported double-digit growth in annual net profit and expects continued robust demand for its artificial intelligence servers in 2026. Now for the highlights under the worldwide section. Iran's rulers unleashed a new crackdown against domestic dissent, including death threats directed at would-be protesters to deter any popular uprising. Germany rejected Trump's call for Allied help to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, and Australia and Japan demurred, resisting being drawn into hostilities against Iran. Iran appears to be allowing select ships through the strait, freeing a trickle of oil that has helped to keep a lid on global energy prices. The Supreme Court will hear arguments on the administration's bid to cut off legal protections for immigrants now allowed to live and work in the U.S. if their home countries are in crisis. White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles has been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer and will undergo treatment while continuing to work, Trump said. A federal judge in Massachusetts blocked the Trump administration from implementing its pared-down list of recommended childhood vaccines. Cuba's communist regime wants to open the island to business from the Cuban America diaspora in a bid to hold off economic disaster. China's economy started the year on a steady footing, giving leaders more room to try to shift the country toward consumption and away from debt-fueled investment. Afghanistan accused Pakistan of an airstrike on a hospital and said the attack killed at least 400 people. The picture on today's front page shows an airplane descending to land, and in the foreground is a huge billowing cloud of dark black smoke. The caption, "An airliner came in for landing at Dubai on Monday as smoke poured from a fuel tank set ablaze near the airport by an Iranian drone." A second smaller picture shows Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of UK, at a podium. And that caption reads, "Keir Starmer said the UK wasn't going to join a war unless it was legal and there was a viable, thought-through plan." A key article, U.S. allies rebuff Trump's demand for help. Germany, Australia, and Japan say they won't be joining in Hormuz campaign, by Lawrence Norman and Bertrand Benoit. U.S. allies on Monday largely balked at President Trump's pressure to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz and relieve pressure on the global economy. Germany has rejected taking part in an operation to wrest control of the strait from Iran, while Japan and Australia have indicated they are unlikely to send vessels to help. The UK and France said they are assessing possible action, but haven't committed to doing anything before fighting halts. All are close U.S. allies. On Monday, Defense Minister Boris Pistorius of Germany dismissed Trump's call for help, asking rhetorically what Trump expects a handful or two handfuls of European frigates to accomplish in the Strait of Hormuz that the powerful U.S. Navy there cannot achieve on its own. "This is not our war. We did not start it," he said. Trump said on Monday that the U.S. doesn't need any country to help it in the strait, but that he is asking for support because I want to find out how they react, adding, "They don't need anybody. We're the strongest nation in the world. We have the strongest military by far in the world." The president said he thinks France will join the Strait of Hormuz coalition following a phone call with President Emmanuel Macron of France. Trump said he told U.S. Prime Minister Keir Starmer that the U.S. has been a longtime ally and that he was frustrated that the UK offered aircraft carriers after the war essentially ended. Trump had sent a pointed message to allies over the weekend. If countries refuse to join in the effort to open the strait, we will remember, he said on Air Force One. He said in an interview with the Financial Times that if North Atlantic Treaty Organization allies don't help, it will be very bad for the future of the alliance. Tehran has threatened to attack any vessels trying to cross without its approval, sending oil prices soaring since the war's start. About 20% of the world's oil supply passed through the strait before the war began, but now the waterway is largely closed. Dubai's Civilian Aviation Authority said on Monday that flights to and from Dubai International Airport were resuming, following a temporary suspension earlier in the day, after a fire broke out near the airport at a fuel tank after a drone-related incident. European reluctance to get involved reflects, in part, strained relations with a U.S. administration that has derided its traditional allies and leveraged its economic and military heft to achieve its desired outcomes. Trump has been trying to weaponize interdependence using American economic power to coerce partners and allies into doing his bidding, said Andreas Krieg, an associate professor at King's College London School of Security Studies. This lever has been so overused that the world is responding with disentanglement from Washington where possible. The main headline: Iran's battered security forces step up repression campaign. Fearing an uprising, rulers launch new arrest and warn of no mercy for dissent. By Margarita Stancati and Henna Mousavi. Iran's rulers unleashed a new crackdown against domestic dissent, arresting people suspecting of collaborating with foreign entities and threatening would-be protesters with death to hold back the risk of an uprising. Iranian security forces have been battered by U.S. and Israeli attacks. Bombing raids have shattered the headquarters and command post of Iran's police, the paramilitary Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and the plainclothes Basij militia. But Iranians said security forces are using fear to keep a tight grip on the streets. Armed men ride around on motorcycles, brandishing their weapons to intimidate people, residents said, particularly at night when city dwellers rarely leave their homes. The men, usually in plain clothes and with their faces covered, also have set up a network of security checkpoints around cities like Tehran, where they routinely stop and search cars. At least 500 people have been arrested since the start of the war, facing accusations that include sharing information with international media or with enemy forces with the purpose of helping them identify targets, said Ahmadreza Radan, the commander of Iran's police force, on state television Sunday. Many were detained for taking photos or videos of sites hit by airstrikes. Others were accused of being monarchists, of reference to supporters of Reza Pahlavi, the exiled son of Iran's last Shah, the most prominent opposition leader abroad. State-run media said 11 suspected monarchists resisted police and were killed. Among those detained were a mother and her teenage son, who are accused of celebrating the killing of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, according to human rights activists in Iran, a U.S.-based group that monitors the country. An Israeli strike on Khamenei's compound killed him in the opening salvo of the war. The system is messaging very clearly that any kind of dissent or mobilization at a popular level will not be tolerated, said Sanam Vakil, director of the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. Iran is facing an existential crisis, and I think it's very clear that they will use whatever means to suppress the internal dimension of the threat. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. New shock hits Fed, muddling its path on rates. The war's effect on energy markets has made the Fed's job fraught. By Nick Timiraeus. It's happening again. For the fifth year running, Federal Reserve officials find themselves expecting inflation to fall back to their 2% goal, only to be confronted with a new disruption that complicates the path. First, it was the pandemic's aftershocks. Then, Russia's war in Ukraine. Last year, a sweeping tariff program. The most recent data suggests inflation progress stalled even before the U.S.'s war in the Middle East disrupted one of the world's most important shipping routes. The turmoil could send up energy and commodity prices in ways that could further delay reaching the target. Officials meeting this week face a question that would have seemed unlikely a few months ago. Not when they will next cut rates, but whether they can credibly keep telling markets to expect a cut at all. At OpenAI, alarm over adult mode. Company has delayed launch of erotica in ChatGPT, but plans to forge ahead. By Sam Schechner and Georgia Wells. In January, OpenAI's hand-picked Council of Advisors on Well-Being and the AI met with the company's representatives for an update about a controversial new feature called Adult Mode. Citing the need to treat adult users like adults, OpenAI Chief Executive Sam Altman had last year floated the idea of enabling erotic conversation in its ChatGPT chatbot and dropping its ban on such X-rated content. The plan sparked vigorous debate internally over the potential risks. Council members with backgrounds in fields like psychology and cognitive neuroscience had also expressed strong reservations. Then OpenAI dropped a bombshell. Despite the concerns, it was forging ahead with its erotica plans. When they assembled for the January meeting, council members were unanimous and furious. They warned that AI-powered erotica could foster unhealthy emotional dependence on ChatGPT for users, and that minors could find ways to access sex chats, according to people familiar with the matter. The people said that one council member, citing cases where ChatGPT users have taken their own lives after developing intense bonds with the bot, claimed that OpenAI risked creating a sexy suicide coach. The debate is the latest flashpoint in the continuing conversation about how to anticipate the potential positive and negative impacts of AI on the economy, society, and individuals. In proposing to allow sexually explicit conversations with its popular chatbot, OpenAI exposed fractures over how to balance rapid user growth and digital freedom with safety and child protection, issues that many believe were belatedly confronted when social media made its debut a generation ago. Earlier this month, OpenAI announced it would delay the launch of adult mode previously slated for the first quarter, saying it was prioritizing other products. Car Dealer's Nightmare, a Professional Haggler by Imani Moise. February was looking like a slow month for car sales, and Tommy McCullough smelled opportunity. Sitting in his Harry Potter-themed office near Charlotte, North Carolina, he picked up the phone and dialed the first of a long string of calls to car dealers. "Hi, I just want to see if you have a car available," he said. "I have the stock number if it's helpful." On his last business day of the month, he set a goal of closing 30 car purchases for the clients who had hired his firm as their professional negotiator. McCullough, 33 years old, spent more than a decade selling cars and auto financing at dealerships. Now he deploys his fluency in car dealer speak and his encyclopedic knowledge of dealer inventory to try to talk down the sticker prices. Some dealers hate him enough that they won't take his calls. Others relish the chance to go toe-to-toe with a deal-making foe. Negotiating a car price has become something of a lost art, but it is one McCullough has practiced at least in the 3 years since he started his business. For a flat fee of $1,000, he negotiates on a buyer's behalf. He also live streams some of his conversations to 600,000 subscribers across TikTok and YouTube. In McCullough's view, car buying has become so absurd that what he's doing makes perfect sense, even if it is a little offbeat. You're hiring a middleman to deal with the middleman to make the middleman more efficient, he said. 1 in 5 buyers committed to monthly car payments of $1,000 or more at the end of last year, the highest share on record, according to Edmunds. There are also high borrowing costs, which he sometimes figures out for clients too, after they have settled on the sticker price. Then there are add-ons like extended warranties, tire protection, and GAP insurance that can inflate the final price by as much as 30%. McCullough runs most of his negotiations from his home, and that is a matter of strategy. He prefers working the phone. Buyers who spend hours at his showroom start to feel like they have invested too much time to walk away. When salespeople push him to come in, he has a ready response. "I've already driven one. I really want it. Gotta have it. I'm just trying to get a good deal today," he said. On the front page, there's also a graph showing NVIDIA's chip for inference is surging. And the caption, NVIDIA's next AI phase. NVIDIA Chief Executive Jensen Huang on Monday unveiled the company's new flagship product aimed at inference, the form of artificial intelligence computing that allows models to respond to user queries. Customers have asked for better chips that are customized for inference computing rather than for training. We're leaving the front page for other articles within the paper. Judge blocks new childhood vaccine recommendations by Lydia Wheeler and Liz Esley White. A federal judge on Monday blocked the Trump administration from implementing its pared-down list of recommended childhood vaccines. The new guidelines were part of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s overhaul of U.S. immunization policies. But Judge Brian E. Murphy, a Biden appointee in Massachusetts, said the government appeared to have improperly bypassed the vaccine advisory panel to change the recommendations. Murphy said that was both a technical, procedural failure itself and a strong indication of something more fundamentally problematic, an abandonment of the technical knowledge and expertise embodied by that committee. Murphy said the government also improperly replaced all the committee members with new appointees who made other changes last year to vaccine recommendations. Murphy blocked the votes taken by the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices from taking effect and put on hold the new committee appointments. The federal panel is tasked with developing vaccine recommendations, which the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention uses to set the immunization schedules for adults and children in the U.S. As part of the changes announced in January, the CDC now recommends childhood vaccinations against 11 diseases, down from 17 under previous guidelines, doing away with the recommendation that all children get immunized against COVID-19, hepatitis A and B, influenza, meningococcal disease, and rotavirus. The CDC is recommending instead that the decision on those 6 vaccines be made by parents and their child's physicians. Cuba woos diaspora to invest on island. Communist regime aims to open up its moribund economy to those now in U.S. By Deborah Acosta, Vera Bergengruen, and Jose de Cordoba. Miami. Cuba's communist regime wants to open up its moribund economy to the Cuban American diaspora, allowing foreign-based entrepreneurs to open up businesses and buy property in a bid to stave off economic disaster amid pressure from the Trump administration. Cuban Deputy Prime Minister Oscar Perez Oliva Fraga, a nephew of former President and Communist Party chief Raul Castro, said the government is open to having a fluid commercial relationship with Cubans residing in the United States and their descendants. He said in a television interview with NBC News broadcast on Monday that his government was also open to having a relationship with U.S. companies. He said Cuba wants to energize sectors of the Cuban economy, ranging from real estate to tourism and infrastructure. His remarks are a departure from decades of hostility toward the Cuban American diaspora, an affluent and powerful community that has historically been aligned with the Republican Party and has been the main proponent for tightening sanctions on Havana. President Trump, who has imposed a crushing oil blockade on the island, has repeatedly said the Cuban government is close to collapse and wants to make a deal. Trump told reporters on Monday he would be having the honor of taking Cuba. He added, "Whether I free it, take it, think I could do anything I want with it. Any major influx of Cuban American capital would require the U.S. to lift current sanctions, barring Americans from most business dealings with Cuba. Trump administration officials haven't indicated that they are willing to do so. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, the battle for the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is giving Trump and Israel a reason to keep weakening the regime. It's no mystery what Iran intends to achieve by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. It seeks to pressure President Trump to end the war prematurely, establishing an Iranian veto on energy flows, and winning impunity in the future. But what if Mr. Trump won't play along? The result is the emerging Battle of Hormuz. An Iranian tanker blockade has always been the main contingency anticipated by war planners, and the U.S. has followed a phased plan of degrading air defenses, missiles, and navy. These are prerequisites to reopening Hormuz to commercial traffic. Asked Sunday about the political cost of rising oil and gas prices, Iran's remaining means of coercion, Mr. Trump replied, "I have to do what's right. I can't say that, I don't want to have any impact on oil prices for 3 or 4 weeks or 2 months, and we're going to let Iran have a nuclear weapon." On Friday, the U.S. bombed military targets on Karg Island and threatened to hit or seize the oil export terminal there. The deployment of a Marine Rapid Response Force to the region adds teeth to the threat. Given a choice between defeat and escalation, Mr. Trump is signaling he may prefer the latter. A Pakistan-bound tanker openly transited Hormuz on Monday, and Iran may cut deals that reinforce its control of who can or cannot pass. Mr. Trump is rallying a coalition, and allies can help reopen the strait with anti-mine vessels and more. Numerous countries have told me they're on the way, he said Monday. Good thing the president hasn't antagonized allies with tariffs or threats to invade Greenland. This is a reminder that treating allies well is wise, so they are more likely to help when you really need them. Retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, who has commanded a carrier strike group, recently laid out what a Hormuz operation might look like. First, continue to degrade to a militarily manageable risk the missiles, mines, drones, and unmanned surface combatants that could threaten U.S. forces and tankers. Second, maintain an unblinking eye that looks 50 miles on either side of the strait and 100 miles back. Third, keep 4 or 8 aircraft persistently overhead during convoy operations equipped with advanced precision kill weapon systems. A cheap rocket, $25,000, that is extremely effective against Shahed drones. Fourth, have armed helos ready to attack small boats that emerge. Fifth, deploy 10 to 14 Aegis destroyers whose air defenses make them the perfect escort ship. These surface combatants first need to be brought into place, and allies could join later. This is no easy mission, and militarily manageable risk won't be confronting to Americans or energy markets if this goes sideways. But Iran doesn't hold all the cards. Its action in Hormuz could force Mr. Trump to see the war through, which is bad news for the regime. 2 weeks ago, the fear in some quarters was that Mr. Trump would end the war when the U.S. ran out of major Iranian military targets to strike, sparing the legion of smaller regime targets Israel wants to hit. Now Tehran has given the U.S. a challenge that could add up to a strategic defeat if Mr. Trump stops early. Israel would use the time to further weaken Iran's regime by carrying out the full campaign, which Mr. Trump had said was planned for 4 to 6 weeks. Mr. Trump's comment Sunday that we may delay a trip to China planned for March 31st is a good sign he isn't limiting the war to arbitrary deadlines. In the longer term, many states will seek alternative supply routes to avoid the strait, and even alternative suppliers, a cost Iran will share with the Gulf states it now attacks. Expect Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to add more pipelines to bypass the Hormuz choke point. Armed with missiles and drones, Iran's regime has closed international waters and attacked neighbors' energy facilities. This is while Iran is relatively weak. Imagine how the regime would blackmail the world and get away with it if it were left to amass 2 or 3 times the missiles or nuclear weapons. The battle for Hormuz underscores the U.S. interest in degrading the Ayatollah regime and giving Iranians a chance to overthrow it. California has an oil and gas problem, but Newsom opposes a Trump plan to restart an offshore drilling project. California Governor Gavin Newsom is trying to shift blame for his state's high gasoline prices to, who else? President Trump. Yet, at the same time, he's opposing the administration's move to restart offshore drilling and production that would reduce his state's reliance on foreign oil and lower its gasoline prices. Energy Secretary Chris Wright on Friday directed Stable Offshore Corporation to restart operations at an oil and gas project in federal waters off the California coast, as well as a pipeline that carries crude to onshore distribution networks. The pipeline hasn't operated since a spill in 2015, which has stranded offshore production. Stable acquired the project and repaired the pipeline, but state officials have blocked oil flows from resuming. Mr. Wright, on Friday, invoked the Defense Production Act, saying their restoration will address supply disruptions risks caused by California policies that have left the region and U.S. military forces dependent on foreign oil. He's right. California's anti-fossil fuel policies have made it, and some 50 military installations in western states, dependent on foreign oil and vulnerable to supply shocks. These include its cap and tax program, low carbon fuel standard, and drilling limitations. While U.S. crude production has increased by about 50% over the last decade, California's output has fallen by half. A lack of interstate pipelines means California can't easily bring in oil or gasoline from other states. The state imports about 60% of its crude from overseas, up from 5% in the mid-1980s, about a third of which comes from the Middle East. About 15% of the state's refined fuels are also imported, much of which depends on Middle East crude. California's reliance on foreign oil raises shipping costs, which are passed on to consumers, and carbon dioxide emissions. It also increases the risk of supply disruptions. That's why gasoline prices have risen by about 15 cents a gallon more in California than they have nationwide during the current war in Iran. The state's oil production is set to fall further after a pipeline that carried crude from Kern County, the state's most prolific oil region, stopped operating in December because declining flows made it uneconomic. Nearly 100 trucks a day are now transporting crude from the fields to a pipeline terminal, but this isn't a financially sustainable workaround. California's increasing reliance on imports will require port upgrades and creates national security vulnerabilities, which Mr. Wright's order will mitigate. Sable said Monday that it has about 540,000 barrels of processed crude oil in storage and plans to begin selling 50,000 barrels a day of oil this month. This will allow American energy to reach domestic refineries more efficiently while reducing California's reliance on foreign oil vulnerable to geopolitical disruption, Mr. Wright said. It would also somewhat reduce California's gasoline prices, which have spiked to $5.52 a gallon versus an average of $3.72 a gallon nationwide. Mr. Newsom, a master in misdirection, last week lambasted Mr. Trump for increasing gasoline prices and called Mr. Wright's order a political attempt to point the finger at California to divide and distract the American people from his wartime failures. Who's really the one trying to distract the people from his failures? You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, Iran will define Trump's legacy. He has a strong case to make, but if he backs down, the cost will be profound. By Walter Russell Mead. When overwhelming force meets unyielding resistance, the result is often explosive. That is what we are seeing this week as President Trump's Operation Epic Fury encounters Iran's determination to resist at all cost. From all accounts, Israeli and American military strikes are meeting and even exceeding their goals of disassembling the regime's infrastructure. Yet Tehran continues to disrupt oil traffic in the vital Persian Gulf, even as it lashes out at its neighbors. 2 weeks in, it appears to be a stalemate. Devastating airstrikes have not broken the mullah's will to resist. The effective closing of the Strait of Hormuz and the global turmoil in energy and stock markets haven't shaken Mr. Trump's resolve. The cruel glare from that explosion is revealing some hard truths. For the president, The question is whether he pulls back or dives deeper in. The answer will define his place in history. If the U.S. pulls back from the new Gulf War without reopening the Strait of Hormuz and achieving goals like securing Iran's nuclear materials, the consequences for Mr. Trump's power and prestige at home and abroad will be profound. Trump always chickens out won't merely be an insult his enemies hurl at him, it will be carved on his tombstone. Yet to advance further into the chaos of an escalating and widening war holds other risks. Unless American forces can break Iran's stranglehold on the Strait of Hormuz, the economic consequences of the war will inexorably grow. Potential risks on Iran to achieve concrete objectives, whether to remove its stockpiles of enriched uranium or to occupy its oil facilities on Karg Island, require boots on the ground. The more deeply Mr. Trump commits himself to the war, the greater the reputational cost of disentangling from it should success prove elusive. The Gulf Arab states have discovered how fragile their vaunted prosperity is. Their wealth cannot protect them from Iranian missiles, drones, or blockades. The wars raging across the region since Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7, 2023, make investors cautious about committing large sums to infrastructure and facilities in a potential war zone. They cannot prosper without American guarantees, but those guarantees come at a price. For Europeans, the harsh light of war illustrates their powerlessness and dependency. The Ukraine war has combined with poorly conceived green energy policies to raise energy costs so high that they threaten the competitiveness of European industry. A prolonged war in the Gulf would have grave consequences for struggling European Union economies, but years of military underinvestment leave those countries with few options for affecting the outcome of the war. At times like this, Europeans need to speak with one voice to have any effect on events. But the stress of war seems to be driving European capitals apart rather than pulling them together. Spain has denounced the American-led war. Germany has tilted toward Washington, although it is firmly rejecting requests for German naval assistance. France and Italy are asking Iran for help in getting oil shipments through the Gulf. Belgium's Prime Minister has called for normalizing relations with Russia to restore Europe's access to cheap natural gas. Indo-Pacific countries are equally shocked by their vulnerability to events they can't control. The U.S. presented the war as a fait accompli to its Indo-Pacific allies. They have been left to cope with the consequences of decisions that affect them profoundly, but with little ability to influence Washington's policy making. From Pakistan to Korea, no region on the planet is more dependent on Middle East energy than the Indo-Pacific. The growing cost and complexities of the Iran war pose the greatest threat yet to Mr. Trump's unorthodox presidency, but he still has some cards to play. His intuitive grasp of the logic of power, his genius for improvisation, and his willingness to adapt dramatic and unconventional approaches equipped him with skills that a war president needs. Crucially, The shock waves the war has sent around the world reinforce the importance of an American victory to stakeholders far and near. Ceding control of a vital waterway and of resources necessary for the prosperity of billions of people to a fanatical and bloodthirsty regime is a recipe for permanent crisis and upheaval. Mr. Trump did not make the public case for the war before he launched it, nor did he consolidate the relations of trust and solidarity with allies that would encourage them to support him in the hour of need. Both omissions have cost him in these early weeks of what could well be the defining test of his presidency. But he has a solid case to make, and to the degree that the American people and our allies abroad understand the stakes, he can find the support that he needs to finish the mission. How to keep up the economic pressure against Iran. If the shooting stops and the regime is still in power, the U.S. can still strike at its financial lifeline. By Michael Doran. Two different Donald Trumps have appeared before the public in recent days. One suggests that the war in Iran may soon be over. The campaign, he says, is very complete, pretty much. The other insists that the U.S. will accept nothing less than unconditional surrender from Tehran and warns that operations will continue until Iran is totally defeated. The president faces a strategic dilemma. Two clocks are running. One measures the collapse of Iran's regime under military and economic pressure. The other measures the growing global disruption, rising oil prices, strained interceptor stockpiles, and pressure from allies and markets to end the conflict. If the second clock runs out first, the president could declare a ceasefire before forcing Tehran to surrender. Events inside Iran offer a glimpse of the dangers of this scenario. Last week, something unusual happened. While the Americans and Israelis bombed Iran, the Iranian rial strengthened against the dollar, rising about 13%. Why? Iran's central bank, one presumes, injected foreign currency into the black market to prop up the rial. But the bank's reserves are limited. That raises a troubling possibility that one or more of Iran's neighbors and allies are quietly helping stabilize the currency. Senior Western officials tell me they suspect Qatar, which is eager to prevent further attacks against its gas infrastructure. China or Russia could also be helping. This kind of behavior isn't unique to Qatar. All Gulf states have a history of hedging, buying temporary removal from Iran's drone and missile targeting list through quiet financial transfers and economic concessions to Tehran. By forcing the Gulf states to hedge, Iran also pushes them toward China. As these nations look to Beijing for security, China's power as a middleman grows. Meanwhile, Beijing strengthens Tehran by facilitating its missile production and buying its oil, which is subject to Western sanctions, at a steep discount. Iran's missiles and drones serve as the muscle enabling China to exert greater influence over the Persian Gulf's energy market as well as its arms market. This cycle helps China construct a shadow banking network through U.S. allies. When China buys oil from Iran, it doesn't pay Tehran directly. Instead, it pays shell companies that route the funds into bank accounts in the United Arab Emirates, a key American partner. According to U.S. Treasury, Emirati firms handle by far the world's highest volume of Iran's shadow funds, exploiting OPEC registries and lax rules to keep Tehran solvent. If the war ends before that system is broken, Beijing will step in, as it did last year, to help Tehran rebuild its missile production facilities. The protection racket will continue. For this reason, the way the war ends matters profoundly. The best outcome would be the permanent destruction of Iran's missile and drone capabilities, the elimination of its launch infrastructure, production facilities, and underground arsenals, together with the complete dismantlement of its nuclear weapons program and the systematic dismantling or decisive defeat of its proxy forces across the region. But if global economic pressure forces an early ceasefire, President Trump still has the tools to ensure that Tehran can never rebuild what it has lost. That will require a new phase of economic warfare, Maximum Pressure Campaign 3.0, building on the original 2018 to 21 campaign 1.0 and its restoration and intensification in 2025 2.0. This campaign must block Iran from rebuilding its military capabilities after any ceasefire. With its currency collapsed, its banking sector paralyzed, and its critical defense infrastructure in ruins, Iran's economy stands closer to systemic failure than at any point since 1979. Maximum Pressure 3.0 must ensure this breakdown continues until the regime can no longer reconstitute its coercive power. Curtailing Iran's oil revenues is critical, but it's only the first step. Washington must put pressure on the trade itself. Tehran will attempt to continue using intermediaries to sell crude oil at steep discounts to China. Every stage of that trade, from shipping and insurance to the ultimate buyers, should face secondary sanctions from the U.S. Washington also must dismantle Iran's shadow banking system. Over the past decade, Tehran has built an elaborate sanctions evasion network using shell companies hosted by American allies such as the UAE. Closing these channels and freezing the funds they hold would strike directly at the regime's financial lifeline. The U.S. must use economic warfare to target Iran's ability to import the machinery and technology needed to rebuild its military infrastructure. Companies that supply industrial equipment, electronics, or specialized materials to Iran should face the risk of losing access to Western markets. Finally, Washington needs to discipline its allies if they help the Iranian regime. No country should provide loans to Tehran or release frozen assets that could stabilize the regime's finances. If a premature ceasefire becomes unavoidable, it must not give Iran the opportunity to stabilize its economy and gain the resources needed to recover.